Welcome back to Train Signal. You are watching the video for Lab 1, Creating an Active Directory Domain Infrastructure for Ben & Brady's Ice Cream Corporation. In this video, you will first learn how to install Active Directory. What we're going to do is, we're going to take our fictitious company, Ben & Brady's Ice Cream Corporation, and then install our first domain controller and create a domain called benandbrady.com. So you will learn how to install the Active Directory, and in the process, I will go over the different components of Active Directory. Then what we will do is we will take our second computer on which we have already installed server and then make it an additional domain controller, and then finally once we have two domain controllers in our network, we will test the replication of Active Directory between these two domain controllers. So let's see what you've accomplished so far. At this point you should have two computers set up as Windows 2000 servers installed on it, and the computer name should be DC1 and DC2. The DC1's IP address should be 200.200.200.1 and the DC2's IP address should be 200.200.200.2. Client 1 is not set up yet. We will be installing Windows 2000 Professional on this computer in a later video. So these two computers should have Windows Server 2000 installed with the appropriate operating systems, and now it is our job to actually create the first domain controller on DC1, on which we will also install DNS as a requisite service, and then DC2 will be the additional domain controller. So I'm sure you've seen me do this in different videos, but if you're watching this video for the very first time, let's get started. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a connection for DC1, and once we are there, I'm going to log into the computer as the administrator. I have also inserted the Windows 2000 server CD-ROM into this computer so that in case it requires any files, it is available to it. So here I am on DC1, and on DC1 we need to install the Active Directory for benandbrady.com. To begin with, let's verify what we have done so far. On DC1 I'm going to right click the computer object and go to properties, and over here you can see that we've installed Windows 2000 server and the service pack 4 is installed. Under network identification you can see that my computer name is actually DC1 and I'm part of the work group. So this was the standard default installation. To make this computer a domain controller, what you need to do is click on start, then go to run, and then type over here DC promo, and then click on the OK button. This starts the Active Directory installation wizard. I'm going to click on the next button over here, and now it's going to ask me exactly what kind of Active Directory would I like to install. And here are the two choices: domain controller for a new domain or an additional domain controller for an existing domain. In this particular case, we're going to select domain controller for a new domain because we are actually creating a new domain, and this will be the first domain controller of this domain. So I'm going to click on the next button over here. Now it's asking me whether I would like to create a new tree or create a child domain in an existing tree. Once again, a tree is a Active Directory object that is created if you have parent and child domains related to each other. In our case, again, we are creating the first domain. We do not have any child domains, and there is no relationship between any domains, simply because, again, this is the first domain. So we're going to create a new tree, and I'm going to click on the next button, and now it's asking me whether I would like to create a new forest of trees, and that is true also. We are creating our first forest. Forest is nothing but a combination of trees in which all the domains are related to each other and share a common Active Directory schema. So once again, I would like to create a new domain, a new tree, and a new forest, and I'm going to click on the next button now, and now it's going to ask me for the DNS name of this domain. Over here I'm going to type our domain name, which is benandbrady.com, and then click on the next button. Now it's performing a significant act. What it's trying to do is the following. It's first trying to contact a DNS server and see if this domain benandbrady.com could be contacted or not. Also, it's trying to send a packet over the cable to determine the uniqueness of this name benandbrady.com. In other words, if you have some other computer on which you are hosting Active Directory and you've already selected Ben & Brady as the domain name, it would not like that. Now it actually verified that benandbrady.com is unique, so it gives me the next screen that says a domain net BIOS name, and it's automatically suggesting to me my domain name without the .com. Now this is also a significant step. I use this like as a litmus test. If I click on the next button and I can get this name automatically pop up over here on the screen, what this means is that I'm well connected. My network card is working fine, and it could not find this name, and so it's telling me that, well, you know what, this name is unique, so let's go ahead and use this. It is important to know that your NIC card must be connected, otherwise this activity will not work like the way it showed up over here. Normally, if your NIC card is not connected, you will see that it shows you a blank over here on which you have to type the name. That is not a good idea. In other words, do not type the name and try to proceed ahead. You will see that sooner or later you will see some error messages and your Active Directory installation will not go smoothly. So in our case, we got a good message over here. I'm going to click on the next button, and now it's letting me know that it's actually going to go to the folder WinNT in the C drive and create a new folder called NTDS, and in there Active Directory will be installed. It's also going to create a log file in the same folder. Just a word of performance over here. If you have two different hard disks on the same computer, it is a good idea to put the log files on a separate hard disk so that the performance can improve. I'm going to click on the next button over here, and now it's letting me know that it's going to put and actually create a new folder called sysvolve in which all the policies and the Active Directory is installed, and this sysvolve will be placed on the C drive in the folder WinNT. And it's also letting me know that this act is possible, or in other words, I can perform this task only if I have NTFS5 as my volume partition. In our case, when I installed server, I did make sure that the partition is NTFS5. Once again, when you're installing server, you have a choice of FAT32 or NTFS. If you select FAT32, you are still able to install server. However, you will not be able to actually perform the installation of Active Directory, because Active Directory requires that the sysvolve must be on NTFS5 volume. So in our case, again, that's not an issue. I'm going to click on the next button, and now it's letting me know that, well, you know what, it could not find a DNS server, and we know that we have not installed DNS servers on this computer. So it's letting us know whether we would like to install and configure a DNS server as part of the DC promo process, and that is good. So I'm going to click on the OK button, and here's the option, yes, install and configure DNS on this computer, and we're going to click on next. And now it wants to know whether the permission on this computer will be compatible with pre-Windows 2000, namely Windows NT computers, or just leave it with Windows 2000 servers. I'm going to keep this the way it is default, not that it matters for us, but I'll just leave the default setting for now. Click on the next button, and now it wants to know the directory services restore mode administrator password. This is the mode in which you start the server if you ever need to restore Active Directory from backup. So over here I'm going to type our password of rainbow, R-A-I-N-B-O-W, all lower cases, R-A-I-N-B-O-W. And just to make an important point over here is that this is not the same as the administrator's password. In other words, you better know what password you set for directory services restore mode, because if you ever have to restore the Active Directory, and we will actually be doing this as part of this video series, you will notice that we will have to enter this password known as rainbow, so that we can actually start a computer in the directory services restore mode and then perform the restoration of Active Directory. Click on the next button, and now here's a summary screen. It's letting me know the choices that I've made, and everything looks good. Our domain is going to be called benandbrady.com. The NetBIOS name is Ben and Brady. Here's where it's going to install the sys volume, and it's going to install and configure the DNS server for us. The permissions will be compatible with pre-Windows 2000 servers. So once again, all the selections that we've made shows up on the screen. I'm going to click on the next button, and here's where it's going to start actually writing the Active Directory on this particular computer. This task will take a few minutes, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. So what I'm going to do is pause the video, and as soon as I've paused the video, you will see that we will have to actually restart the server. We will do that, and then we'll take it from there. So let me pause the video, and I'll join you as soon as the installation of Active Directory is almost finished. I'm back, and this process took about 5 minutes. So now I'm going to click on the finish button, and it wants us to restart the server now. I'm going to click on this button, and very soon we're going to lose our remote desktop connection. Here we go, it's gone. And now the server DC1 is going to restart. Once the server restarts, I will take you around I'll take you around a DC1 and show the changes that have been made as a result of the installation of Active Directory. So once again, I'm going to pause the video over here. I'm going to let DC1 start up, and then once it is started, we will take a tour of Active Directory. I'm back again. DC1 just restarted, so let's make our connection to it. Okay, let me type in the password. And what I'm going to do is eventually save the password so I do not have to enter it every time I make a connection to DC1, so that these connections go faster. And I'm going to change the screen the way it looks now, so that once again we are on DC1. Now let's take a little tour of Active Directory, and I highly recommend that you do that every time you install a first domain controller, just to make sure everything is in sync and everything is exactly how you expect it. So to begin with, let's right click on DC1, go to properties, and then go to network identification, and here we go. our domain is benandbrady.com and our FQDN, or the full computer name, is dc1.benandbrady.com. You will also notice that the properties button is gone now. In other words, I can no longer use it. It's grayed out simply because as the domain controller for the benandbrady.com domain, I cannot make any changes. This is a fixed static computer. In fact, a very important computer. This is a server that is the root of the domain, the root of the tree, as well as the root of the forest. So you can't just change anything over here simply because this will create a lot of confusion in the Active Directory. So that's the first place to check. The second place to check is by going to Programs, Admin Tools, and the tool that we use the most on a domain controller is Active Directory Users and Computers. So I'm going to select that tool, and let's verify our Active Directory. To begin with, let me just reposition these columns over here so I can show you the screens a little bit better. And we will take a brief tour of Active Directory so that in case you're not too familiar with this, you'll soon be and know very well how to use the Active Directory Users and Computers tool. So to begin with, let's go to the Windows setting over here. Let's click on the View, and in there select Advanced Features so that you can see everything that's available. So, if you do not do that, some of the folders are hidden and they're not easily visible. Now here's my domain, benandbrady.com, and this is the symbol of the domain object. I'm going to expand this, and there are certain containers over here that is of interest to us. The very first container is, or rather the last computer container in this particular figure is a users container. This is where the users accounts are located by default. Okay, so every time you create a user by default, it is located over here, and the one that is created by default is the administrator's account, and it is located right here. Guest is also created, but you can see that it is disabled. The next container that is of interest to me at this point is the domain controllers container. So I'm going to click on this one, and as you can see, this particular container, also known as the domain controllers OU, has the computer objects for all the domain controllers for the benandbrady.com. At this point, we just have one computer object or one domain controller, namely DC1, and it is located in this domain controllers OU. And then the third container that I would like to show you is the computers container. This would have a listing of all the clients of benandbrady.com. At this point, we do not have a client, but eventually when we join a client to this domain, you will see that the client computer accounts are created over here by default. One more container that I would like you to get familiar with is a built-in container. This has groups for backward compatibility with Windows NT. If you have done Windows NT, I'm sure you're familiar with these default groups, namely the account operators group, the administrators group, and so forth. This is again over here strictly for backward compatibility, simply because Windows NT did not have any ideas of OUs. Everything in Windows NT went into one location. And the other significant thing about this particular container is that I cannot actually move any object from here to any other container. Let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to click on the users container and click on the administrator's account, right click, and you will notice over here one of the things I can do is move this account from the users container to some other container. So I'm going to click on the move button, and then over here if I select, for example, domain controllers, I can move this user object from the users container over here to the domain controllers container over here. I won't actually perform this activity, but I just want to point out something over here. Any of these groups cannot be moved out of built-in. So let's try that. I'm going to click on the account operators group, right click, and you will notice that the move is not available. In fact, even if I go to all tasks, you'll see it's not available. Okay, so just be aware of that you cannot actually move it from there to somewhere else. Now, the third thing I'm going to show you is the DNS, which again is significant and required for the working of the Active Directory. So here's DNS. It was installed for us, and by default it created the computer object DC1, meaning that this is our DNS server for the benandbrady.com domain, and it also created a forward lookup zone, which is mandatory. And if I expand this zone, what it did was it created a zone called benandbrady.com. This zone will eventually have a listing of all computers and their IP addresses for the benandbrady.com domain. So at this point we have just one computer, DC1, and it is listed over here correctly. Okay, so just want to make sure I wanted to show you all the significant changes that have taken place on DC1 before we actually go ahead and install the additional domain controller on DC2. Now before we do that, what we should make sure is that we have good connectivity between DC1 and DC2. So I can either go to DC1 or DC2 and then go to the command prompt, and what I'm going to do over here is make sure I'm able to ping DC2, whose IP address is 200.200.200.2. So let's see if I have connectivity. Here we go. So I do have connectivity between DC1 and DC2. This is important because when I install the additional domain controller, what will happen is the domain database will actually come from DC1 to DC2. So let's see that in action. So what I'm going to do is log off from DC1 at this point and then go to our second computer, namely DC2. Let's make a connection now over there. And DC2, the only difference between DC2 and DC1 is actually going to be the fact that DC2 will not have or will not be hosting the DNS service. Okay, in our labs, I've just kept one DNS server, namely domain controller 1. So here we go. We're going to perform the same activity over here. So click on start, run, and then type DC promo. Click on the OK button. It's going to start the Active Directory installation wizard. I'm going to click on the next button over here. And now let's start answering the questions one more time. Domain controller type. For this particular case, it's going to be an additional domain controller for the existing domain. So I'm going to click on this and then click on the next button. And now it wants to know, well, what domain are you trying to make this an additional domain controller of? Now I'm going to type in the username administrator. The password is password and the domain name is benandbrady.com. Now before I continue further, let's have a brief discussion as to what this is. I need the permission of either the domain admin or the enterprise admin of benandbrady.com so that I can join additional domain controllers. This is a security check. Otherwise what can happen is that somebody can just walk into a company with a laptop, install server 2000 on it, connect the laptop to the local area network by finding the closest available port, and then simply run this process and then get the Active Directory installed on their computers as well. In fact, this person will, so to speak, hijack the entire Active Directory from DC1 onto their servers. So this is not permitted. You have to be either a domain admin of benandbrady.com or the enterprise admin to be able to perform this activity. So I've done that, and now this is a critical step, and sometimes it does fail in the beginning, and if it does, I'll show you how to troubleshoot right here on the screen. When I click next, it's trying to contact the benandbrady.com domain, and I'm going to click on browse and pick it up and then click on OK, because what will happen is it's not going to install a brand new Active Directory on this. It will actually copy the Active Directory database from DC1 and then lodge it onto DC2. So I'm going to click on the next button, and now it's asking me the same questions. Where would you want to install the Active Directory in the log files? I'll keep the default settings. Once again, I have NTFS5 on the hard disk over here, so sysfault should not have any problems creating it. The directory services restore mode password will again be rainbow, RAINBOW, all lower cases. Okay, I'm going to confirm the password over here, click on next, and then click on the next button again. And as you can see from this graphic, a little bit different from the graphic that you saw before. Here's what this graphic is trying to tell you, and somebody at Microsoft spent a considerable amount of time trying to make sure that it is visually appealing and conveys a technical message. So what is happening is that Active Directory is being transferred or being copied from domain controller 1 or DC1, and this is the symbol of the domain, and you can see a little bubble going through the Ethernet cable over here or through some network cable and then going on to DC2. Once it reaches here, the graphic is showing you that it's actually writing the domain database from there. So once again, let's follow that. Here goes the bubble. Once it comes up, it's being written to Active Directory 2. I'm sorry, to DC2, and this will eventually be our additional domain controller. So what I'm going to do is let this process finish. Again, it's going to take a few minutes, and I'll let server DC2 restart. Once it restarts, it will be the additional domain controller for our network, and then what we will do is tour the Active Directory one more time and see if we can observe the computer object for DC2 in the database out there, and then what we will do is perform replication so that our DC1 and DC2 carry the same Active Directory database and get synced with each other from time to time. So I'm going to pause the video over here and join you very soon once DC2 has finished, has completed installing the Active Directory. I'm back again. DC2 just restarted, and I'm going to make a connection to DC2 now. And now what we're going to do is observe the Active Directory one more time to see the changes that were made due to the installation of DC2 as the additional domain controller. So I'm on DC2. Let's right-click the computer object, properties, network identification. Once again, it is a domain controller for benandbrady.com. So that's one verification. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to verify everything that we did before. So let's go to Active Directory users and computers. And in this case, the change should be the fact that in the domain controllers OU, there should be two computer objects. There we go, DC1 and then DC2. So these are the two domain controllers for the benandbrady.com. That's exactly how you find out the domain controllers for a network, by going to the domain controllers container and then finding those domain controllers over there. So I'm going to close Active Directory also. Also, by the way, please note that I'm actually on DC2 at this point, and I was able to bring up the same objects that I was able to in DC1. So Active Directory is now installed on DC2, and in fact I can go to any of the domain controllers and create an object in the Active Directory on either one of them, and then the other one will get it through replication. So that's the next topic of discussion, replication. Now that I have two domain controllers, I have to ensure that the two can replicate with each other, and this process in the beginning takes a little while to actually sink in. In other words, after you've installed the additional domain controllers, give it some time for it to create connection objects, and once the connection objects are created, you will see that you're able to replicate the Active Directory between these domains. So to begin with, you need to use a tool called Active Directory Sites and Services, and again I just started this tool from the admin tools console. So from administrative tools link, I started Active Directory Sites and Services. I'm going to talk a lot about this tool and about Active Directory Sites and Services in detail in lab 16 of this advanced Active Directory series. So over here, what you need to know is that if I expand the site known as the default first site name, which is the one that is created by default, just a little word on site. A site is a geographical object. In other words, a site is nothing but a geographical location. In our case, we have just one location, and namely the location is the default first site name. So in there is a container called servers. I'm going to expand the servers container, and here are our domain controllers. This particular servers container will list only the domain controllers of the benandbrady.com domain. So I'm going to expand the first domain controller DC1, and you will see that there is a link called NTDS settings. I'm going to expand the second one called DC2, and then again there is a link called NTDS settings. Click on the link, and then on the right hand side over here, select it. Now right click and say replicate now, and I should see a message that says that Active Directory has replicated the connections. What you've done is the following. You've replicated from server DC1 to DC2 because I actually selected the NTDS settings from DC2. So once again, if you would like to replicate from DC2 to DC1, what you do is you go under DC1, select NTDS, then on the right hand side, right click and say replicate now, and now you have successfully replicated from DC2 to DC1. Once in a while this will happen that it will not automatically create this object. Just create the object yourself simply by right clicking on this and say new Active Directory connection, pick up the other domain controller, the other domain controller, meaning that since I went from DC1, pick up DC2 and create the connection objects yourself. If not, you will notice that sooner or later, in a few minutes actually, after each domain controller is created, Active Directory automatically creates these connection objects for you. And the last thing to check is our DNS. So once again, I'm on DC2, and DC2, if you recall, is not the DNS server. So if I go over here, I do not have the DNS link over here. So what I'm going to do is minimize this connection and then go to our connection for DC1, which is still open over here. Very good. And I'm going to go to the admin tools, and in there select DNS. Let's expand our zone and select benandbrady.com, and here we go. My second domain controller DC2 was automatically registered as 200.200.200.2. So we have a working domain at this point. We have two domain controllers. Let's summarize this through our network diagram over here. We have two domain controllers, DC1 and DC2. They are part of the benandbrady.com network. DC1 is the first domain controller, DC2 is the additional domain controller, and we have verified the replication between these two domain controllers. So our domain is set up. It's now time to set up clients, and this will be the activity that we'll perform in the next lab. So once again, I thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you very soon in a different video in Active Directory.